So Dylan, we have been pro-counseling forever, but it took us 8 years of marriage before we went to counseling. Why do you think that is?
The biggest reason is I didn't want to pay for it, and so I think that's a big one. And then I think there's just the natural reaction to think that you don't need it, because I think we often think of counseling as when things are really bad, that's when you go, and so those two things probably kept us out the longest. Again, I'm a saver and you're a spender, so the money thing, you're like, whatever. But to me, I was like, that's a lot of money. And again, thinking, well, our marriage isn't terrible, and you only go to counseling, marriage counseling for marriage is terrible. That's kind of what stopped us for a long time.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true. I think money is one of the biggest things that held us up from going to counseling. And then I think oftentimes too, we would have issues and it would feel like they would be resolved, but only because time had passed and we kind of like pushed it under the rug. But the problem with that philosophy of just like, oh, well, we fought about that last week, but we're not fighting about it this week, so we don't need counseling, is that as time goes on, when that same kind of underlying issue comes up later in the future, it's now a bigger problem because it's kind of built on each other and it never really got resolved, which is definitely what I feel like happened in our marriage.
This is correct.
Yes. So what did you think counseling was going to be like before you went to counseling?
Honestly, I thought counseling would be what it is. So I've I lost my dad when I was 19, so I've been to counseling and I'd experienced the benefits of it. So I didn't have a lot of reservations. I know probably for a lot of guys there are, but for me, I kind of knew what it was going to be, and it was pretty much what I thought.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. I thought it was going to be a little bit more intense than it is. Really what counseling feels like to me is like we're talking to a friend. I mean, we really like our counselor. He asks really good questions. He gives us really good advice. He makes us think about things that we hadn't thought about before. I thought it was going to be more emotionally draining to go to counseling. I thought it was going to take like deeper work, but it really just feels like you have a friend who's kind of like a marriage mentor who's like walking you through your issues.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful, especially for men, because you're like, oh, counseling, we have to sit on the couch and we have to cry, we have to share our feelings, and it's going to be miserable. That's not really what it's like. It is really kind of like having an older mentor friend who cares about you. And I think we forget that counselors are professionally trained. Like, we just think it's like talking to a friend. They know what they're doing. They have a ton of experience, and they really are like for you and on your team. And so I think, again, at least for men, it's like this is going to be this massive, we have to get really emotional right away. That's not really how it works. It is way less intimidating than you think it would be, I think, for most people.
Yeah, I also really appreciate how practical it is. I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but we've kind of told our counselor, like, hey, and we're used to getting wise counsel, right? Dylan's a pastor. He has elders. We've been in the church world for a long time. I've had mentors before. So I'm used to hearing advice from someone who I trust and like knowing I actually need to do it instead of just, well, maybe I'll do that. No, I actually do want your advice and I actually want to implement it in my life. And so we were kind of used to that. So we, communicated that to our counselor. And because of that, he's been really direct with us and really practical with us. And he gives us homework. And I've really appreciated that about counseling.
This is true.
Yeah. So Dylan, what do you appreciate about counseling? What has it done for our marriage?
Well, it allows us to talk through things. It's helpful to have a third party to kind of tell you what you should do. Again, I only speak from a guy perspective, but we're a lot more like, well, just tell me what I need to do. And I think it's helpful to have a third party tell you what you need to do, because I think especially if you're having a disagreement with your spouse, you don't really want your spouse to tell you what to do, and your spouse can be wrong as well. Like, your spouse also needs to have elder and maybe wiser counsel who can speak objectively to the situation, which obviously you and your spouse are biased and you have your own issues, and so you can't always do that. And so what's really helpful about it is having someone who can objectively say, here's what you need to do. And it's not like, you're only listening to one side of the story or one spouse side of the story. But going to a counselor allows them to say, here's what you need to do. And it allows you to, in my experience, again, it makes it easier to open up to somebody who cares about you and can see both sides of the story instead of just trying to listen to only one person who has their own agenda. Even if we like to say that we all really have our own agenda. We're not always very objective. And so having a neutral third party is really helpful.
Yeah, I'd have to echo that. I think it's been really helpful for me and like sharpening for me to hear our counselor tell me when I'm wrong. And it's just really confirming, because if I'm being honest, just in my own sinful nature, when Dylan tells me I'm wrong, sometimes I don't really believe him until a third person tells me that I'm wrong and that I need to grow in this area and that I need to work on it. And so it's been really like it gives me a lot of accountability that I really
Yeah.
appreciate.
So hot take: the wife is not always right.
True story.
And so again, it's like kind of our sarcastic, joking thing that our culture says, but then we begin to believe it, and men can begin to just say, "Well, whatever you want to do is true, and we should do that," and it's not true. And so it's helpful to have someone objectively say, "Here's where both of you need to work," and then it's also helpful to have someone who there's some accountability there, because one thing to say, "Okay, well." You get a disagreement with your spouse. I'm never going to do that again until the next time you do it. But having someone who can speak objectively to what you're doing, who is going to hold you accountable for what you're doing, makes you more likely to actually try to follow through and do it in the future.
Absolutely. And I would say another thing that I have really appreciated about counseling is our counselor has really given us language for things. Like he's given us words for issues that we have that I didn't have beforehand. And for some reason, having language, having words for these things makes it way more manageable to deal with them and to grow through them and to conquer them and to find victory over them. And so just a third party, again, professional who's trained to do this can help you in ways that you can't even begin to imagine until you experience counseling for yourself. Yeah. So for counseling, you're not an emotional guy. You don't like to talk about your emotions, and obviously we do have to do that sometimes in counseling. How do you push through that, and what has that looked like for you?
For me personally, it's a little bit easier to have someone else than just my spouse. And I think we can say things are right or wrong, but they just are. And I think it's not always the man that's less emotional, but more often than not. It's easier to have someone who just like asks you a question and you have to answer it than just your spouse. And so it's easier maybe to get some of the language that you're talking about. It's hard to kind of put your finger on it when it's just you and your spouse. I found it's easier if someone's just like, why do you do this? What are you thinking? Why do you think this way? And for better or for worse, it just is what it is. Having a third party like making you answer those questions, I have found is easier for me. Now you could say, well, Dylan, you need to get over it. And that's true. But we can only work with our wirings and how we operate is how we operate. And so it is helpful and easier for me to talk about things that I might not normally want to talk about, which then later on follow-up conversations, it makes it easier for both of us.
Absolutely. What would you say to a guy who's listening today who is just really fearful about going to counseling?
Well, I mean, yeah, we said earlier, it's not as intimidating as you think it is. They're trained in this, and so there's nothing that you're going to say or do that they're going to be surprised of or never heard before. And if you want to have a better marriage and you're stuck and you've been stuck for a while, that's not going to change. And so you either can do nothing about it or you can actually do something about it. And if you care for your spouse, and this could go either way, the guy could be the one going to want to go to marriage and the wife could say no. If you actually care for them, at some point you're going to have to do something about that. And I would just say, again, it's much easier than you think it's going to be. It's really not intimidating. And so I would just say go for it.
What would you say to the guy who thinks it's a waste of time and a waste of money to go to counseling? They're not sold on it.
I mean, if your marriage is falling apart, you need to go. Or if it's fine and you just have small things or you wanted to make it better, clearly it has not gotten any better from you doing whatever you want to do. And so you can be honest with the fact and just say that I'm okay with not having a great marriage. Or if you actually want to have a better marriage, if you want to have an awesome marriage, then you actually got to do something about it. And so it's not intimidating, it's not hard, and you are perfectly designed to get the results that you're currently getting. And if you want them to change, this is a route to try that.
Yeah, absolutely. Counseling is wonderful. You won't know what it's like until you try it for yourself. And I just think it's really worth it. I think no matter where your marriage is today, if you're thinking, maybe we should get counseling, I'd say that's enough of a reason to sign up and to try it. And your marriage is worth it. It's worth the money and it's worth the time.
And it doesn't have to, you don't have to sign up for like 12 sessions. I mean, honestly, maybe if you've never gone before, it might take a few. But even after you've gone, it's like you can go every once in a while to just talk through some new things and to kind of figure out where to make next steps. But it's not like you're making a 3-month or 12 session or whatever commitment. Honestly, even just a couple of times can make a big improvement or make a lot of difference.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fun talking about counseling today. We would love to hear from you. Comment down below. Have you been to counseling? What was that like for you? What questions do you have about counseling? And if you are going to go to counseling, let us know how it goes and what wins you have experienced from going to counseling in your marriage. If you like these videos, be sure to subscribe and click the bell so that you get notified every time we post a new video here at Awesome Marriage.